Hello parents, family members, caregivers. My name is Dr. John McNaught from the Undetermined Project, and this is the first of 3 videos that's going to focus on supporting self-determined behaviors at home. I certainly miss the opportunity to speak to you all in person, but I hope you'll find these videos informative and give you some things to think about. So this first video is going to focus on autonomy, but I'll give you a brief introduction of Undetermined before we get started. So we have a website, undetermined.org. Everything on that website is a free resource, and we have separate sections for educators, parents, and youth with disabilities. And so some of the tools I show you today is just really scratching the surface of the resources we have available to you as a parent or family member, including hundreds of videos of parents talking about the journey they've been on. The Undetermined Project works with all students with disabilities. And so we have what we call the elements of Undetermined, and these are the core elements that make up self-determination. So self-determination is not just something that you watch a video and you're magically self-determined. It's a series of elements that require work in education and practicing to attain and become self-determined. And so things like choice making, decision making, problem solving, self-advocacy, goal setting are all elements that need to be fostered in youth. And so when you think about it, the first level, choice making, decision making, problem solving, those are skills which lead to the abilities of goal setting, self-regulation, and self-advocacy. And once you attain those abilities, you start to believe that you can control what happens to you, that you have the ability to succeed, and you're aware of your own strengths, needs, and limitations. So the Undetermined Project is based on self-determination theory. And so we're going to look at, over the course of 3 videos, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And the main piece I want you to remember is that these 3 factors, these 3 pieces that we'll discuss in detail, have to be present in the environment for self-determined behaviors to happen. So what you're going to notice throughout these 3 videos is this trend of specific elements of Undetermined on the left are going to, with environmental supports of autonomy, competence, and relatedness, will lead to a self-determined individual. So here we're going to talk specifically about autonomy. What does it mean? What does it look like? What are some strategies? And we'll also, throughout the presentation, you'll actually hear from some of the Undetermined youth leaders. I've selected 3 of our older youth leaders simply because they've been in the project for close to a decade and have the ability to look back at their past experiences and what shaped their behaviors in regard to autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So let's first look at what is autonomy. And simply, it's just the feeling that you're in control of your own behavior, so you have some independence. And so what kind of elements from Undetermined are we focusing on? You're looking at internal locus of control, so you're in control of what happens to you. Self-regulation, being able to regulate your emotions, how you feel, how you react, choice-making and decision-making. So you have some say in things that happen to you during the day. And so how do we do this? Simply, we build in choices. We provide problem-solving opportunities. We provide opportunities to set goal, and we allow failure as a learning experience. And so what does this look like at home? It could be as simple as a choice board for chores. It can be as simple as when there's a problem, instead of you as the parent stepping in and solving it, letting your son or daughter or helping them solve their own problem. And so, for instance, in my house, my wife used to assign chores to my two daughters who are 13 and 14. And it was always a battle as far as, who's doing what, and no one wanted to, do anything. And it was amazing to me by simply sticking up a choice board and having a list of everything that needed to be accomplished during the week and giving them the ability to choose what chore they did and the timeline on when it got done, as long as it was done by a certain day and time. And what I noticed was the fighting stopped, the arguing stopped, and the key for us was to not, as they would say, nag them, right? If they were within their timelines, we needed to step back and let them proceed. Problem-solving opportunities. If you have more than one child and they're getting in arguments with each other at home because people are bored because of not being able to be outside as much as usual, or having school end early because of our current situation. Giving them the opportunity to work some things out. So providing them with choices on how to solve the problem instead of just stepping in and doing it for them. What you'll hear a lot from our three youth leaders is allowing failure as a learning experience. So I'm going to come back to that one after we listen to a couple of videos of our youth leaders and their experiences with failure. Undetermined has two specific, one specific tool and then one just concept I want to talk about. So the tool is the one-pager, which we'll go into detail in a second. And then the idea I want to talk about is student-led conferences. So I was a former high school special education teacher, and parent-teacher conference night, the joke among special ed teachers was that it was always the loneliest night of the year. And you start thinking, why is that? And, a lot of times students with disabilities struggle in school if they're not given the appropriate accommodations. And so there wasn't a whole lot of incentive to come to a parent-teacher conference as a parent and hear about everything your kid's struggling with. In most cases, parents are well aware of what their son or daughter's struggles are because they live with them. And so as a teacher, decided to kind of flip the script. What if the students led the meeting and chose, there's your autonomy, chose what work products they were particularly proud of and wanted to talk about during this meeting. And so as a special ed teacher, my participation went from 0 to 100% in 1 year of implementation. And, what I found was giving the students some say and some choice, right, was very, very powerful. And it also kind of changed the narrative of school was this place of struggle and failure. It also, as a teacher, allowed me to form better relationships with parents because we were taking more of a strengths-based approach. I think what you'll find is historically special education has taken a deficit-based approach. So if any of you have read, your son or daughter's individualized education plan, a lot of times those are written in such a way that it's everything your son or daughter can't do. And, I think that has limited use. Is it important? Sure. But you know what else is important? Everything they can do and how we're going to leverage those strengths to become successful. So one way to do that is a simple tool we call the one-pager. And so you'll see it's got 4 categories: strengths, preference, interests, and needs. And it's really that simple. So strengths: what do I do well in school? What do I do well at home or in my community? And what do other people say are my strengths? Similar for preferences: what works for me? What helps me be successful? Where do I see myself in the future? Interests: what do I like to do when I'm not in school? What activities or organizations do I enjoy participating in? What are my hobbies? Needs: what are the accommodations that help me? How can others help me? And what are some things that are difficult for me? Now, I always recommend to parents, to teachers, that everyone fill out one of these. So everyone in the family should have one of these. I have one, my wife has one, each of my daughters have one, and we update it, all the time. And what this does is it helps, the student, your son or daughter, articulate what their strengths, preferences, interests, and needs are. It also kind of gives you a little bit of insight into your child. A lot of times, especially around preferences, where do I see myself in the future? There's a big gap between what the child wants and what the parent sees the future looking like. So this is a great conversation starter between you and your child. Also, interests. I think what you'll hear from some of our youth leaders is that school's hard. And a lot of times school is a place where they're not put in situations that leverage their strengths. And that can be exhausting and tiring and defeating. And it's important to understand and get an idea of, what are they interested in outside of school, and how can you provide some opportunities for that to happen at home, especially if you and your child don't share the same interests. I've got one daughter who's a complete introvert and one daughter who's a complete extrovert. And I would say my wife and I both tend to fall on more of the introvert side of the spectrum. And so we have to push ourselves to provide opportunities for our younger daughter to get out and do things that she loves out in the community with a ton of people that might not be what my wife and I prefer. And then accommodations. Accommodations are not just a thing that are provided in school, right? And so we're pushing here for a level of independence. And so what are the accommodations you can provide at home to allow your son or daughter to experience some more independence? And so, for instance, how can you make accommodations so that they can make their own lunch in the morning, for lunchtime or breakfast or whatever? Any kind of independent living skills. How can you teach them, or what kind of accommodations can you provide so they can do their own laundry? What I've found is, and I've been doing this now for over 20 years, what I've found is that the earlier you start, right, the easier it is. And so if you're going to start with a 17-year-old and start saying, hey, I want you to do all these things, it's going to be good for you, and you've been doing them all along for them, that's kind of a hard sell. So for instance, if my mother or father was making me dinner 7 nights a week, and I liked the food and it was good cooking, what's my incentive to then start learning how to cook for myself, right? And so, starting early. Both my kids were with help, making their own lunches for school in early elementary school. Now, does that take time? More time? Yes. Is it faster if I just do it myself? Yes. Were there nights where I just did it because we were under pressure for whatever reason? Absolutely. So everything I talk about for home, right? You need to do what works for you. It doesn't need to be 100% of the time. So you're going to hear from Betsy in a second, but I wanted to give you an actual visual of what one can look like, right? And so this is Betsy, one of our youth leaders. Her strengths are being organized. She likes to color code everything, and she's a social person. Preferences, she likes to take and finish a test in one day. She likes color-coded notes. She likes mnemonics, so funny ways to remember things. And she likes to have a snack while she takes a test. Interested in horseback riding, hanging out with friends and family, and working. Needs tests read aloud, quiet space to work, and getting pulled out of the general education classroom for testing. All right? And so as a parent, how does this help? What are opportunities at home for you to add some organization to your house that Betsy could help with, right? Horseback riding. How many opportunities are there for her to ride a horse, or maybe instruct some people in how to horseback ride? All sorts of opportunities here to extend this past just your typical, school day. And so now I'm going to share with you 3 different perspectives youth perspectives on parent involvement concerning autonomy, and then we'll kind of discuss the trend that we found along the way. So this first one is Annie.
Hey parents, so some things that my parents did in the past to help me, set goals and take chances and, be in control of my life was by allowing me to, have some failures and make sure I learned from them. There were a few decisions that I made that I'm 100% positive my mom could have stepped in and fixed right away. But she sat back and let me fail and then made sure I learned from it. And one thing my parents, they also really encouraged me to play sports growing up and to make friends. And, being a teenage girl, there was a lot of teenage drama. And so that was something my parents would, sit back and encourage me to make my best judgments when it came to friends. Something that was not helpful was how often my mom would ask me about my goal sheet. I would, the smallest bad decision, my mom would be like, oh, well, is that going to help you reach your goal on your goal sheet? So she brought it up a little more often than I would have liked.
Okay, and this next one is Betsy, and we shared her one-pager earlier.
One thing that my parents really set me up for failure was, even though I had a disability, I was told multiple times from the beginning that I was going to fail. Even if I didn't have a disability, I was going to fail at life, and the things that come with it. I knew that if I didn't sit down and study and take notes and color code and organize everything, that I was going to fail. And my parents were that straight to my face. My mom does not sugarcoat anything. My mom was never that person to just tell me, to baby me. She was always like, this is what's going to happen if you don't do it. And there have been nights where I had to sit at the table and my parents were like, you didn't do this and you didn't do that, so that's why you got a 32 on this test or whatever. So I don't think anything that my parents did to me was awful. At that point in time in my life, I did not like them for making me put this in my face and said, this is the reason why you failed. You're the reason. You didn't study harder. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. But now that I see it, I know what I can and can't do. When I'm now in college and in my work, I have to do certain things to get certain awards and I would say bragging about it. But I don't think anything that my parents did was bad. I think that your parents should not sugarcoat things for you and should tell you straight up, this is what you need to do to be successful. So.
And then lastly, we'll hear from Caden.
All right, parents. So this is going to be something that is going to be a little bit more difficult to hear, but your youth is super awesome, and they have goals for themselves and they want to be able to get there. And something that you have to do is give up a little control and let them fail. I know this is a really scary thing to do. I know with my parents it was pretty difficult for them to give me some freedom to be able to go and make some decisions that I might fail at. I might fail college. I might not do so well in the real world, where I'm going to have to make a job, where I'm going to have to go to a job and then have to pay rent and pay my bills. Even though that is part of growing up, it can be a really scary thing. It's a scary thing for the youth as well, but if you have the opportunity to help your youth, it's really important that you can. And if you can, you should. I think that this is something that's really important for everyone in this decision, to give them more freedom. It can be gradual, but it's really important for you to do.
Okay, so some trends that we should talk about. Opportunities to practice. And so I think we're going to see throughout the three videos is, and the research bears this out, one of the biggest predictors of of successful self-determined behaviors is opportunities to practice, and not just in school. Because guess what? School ends, and then there's the real world. And so providing as many opportunities, in this case for autonomy, as you can is essential. Now, again, remember, look, life comes at you fast, and this is not me advocating that 100% of the time you need to provide these opportunities, right? But you do need to keep it in the forefront. And, for me, my kids are a year apart. And so when they were young, it was difficult. And so I would schedule in my, on my calendar, okay, we're gonna practice these skills tonight. And so I'm gonna make sure I have extra time in the night or on the weekend to practice some independence, some autonomy, whatever. Somewhere along the line, failure was, kind of got this tag put on it that it's a bad word, right? And so, and I think, a lot of times as special educators, we're at fault for this, myself, other special educators, because we're trying to protect. And I think a lot of times parents are trying to protect, right? I know as a parent of two, I don't want to see my kids fail. I want to protect them. But what I've learned over 20 years is if we keep jumping in before a failure is experienced, the first time our children experience failure and we're not around, it's going to be catastrophic. There's going to be no one there to pick them up. And I've seen it happen. And so what we need to do is, right, we need to take a breath. We need to let them fail. And then we need to be there to pick them up, to reassess the situation, create a new plan, and move forward. I think it sounds easy, and I think especially Caden told you, no, he knows it's hard, right? And he's a kid, but you've got to let your sons and daughters try difficult things or get into problems, and figure out ways to work it out. And in my house, we talk all the time about failure's not a bad word. And, it's still kind of something we talk about all the time, because I think in school, in a traditional school with the A to F grading, failure is a bad word. And so pushing the idea that it's part of the learning process, right? I tell my kids I fail all the time. I fail every day. If I'm not trying new things, I'm bored. The other piece that goes with that is having high expectations. And so as a parent, have high expectations, right? Push your son or daughter, but provide supports, okay? I mean, we're not going to give a kid at 18 years old the keys to a car if we never taught them how to drive. It's the same thing with autonomy, okay? We're going to have these high expectations, and we're going to provide the supports, and we're going to scaffold those. So as you progress through your skills, beliefs, and behaviors, right, and become more self-determined, those supports are going to fall away a little bit, but know that we're always going to be there to help pick you up. Talking about careers at an early age, talking about independent living at an early age, right? Having those discussions and setting goals that the student wants to set. And we'll talk about goal setting a little bit later in one of the other videos. But providing those opportunities to practice, preaching that failure is not a bad word, and having high expectations are three kind of, over the past 20 years, not just in these videos, but thoughts that have absolutely permeated the narrative of self-determination. All right, well, that concludes autonomy. I thank you for your time, and the next video we'll talk about will be the idea of establishing competence.